So they wheel me down the hall, say goodbye to my wife. They slide me over onto the surgical table, and I don't remember them putting a mask on me or anything. I just looked off to my right, and Jesus is standing there in a white robe. And he holds out his hand and he says, I want to answer your prayer. And now I am thinking still very clearly, and this is not Jesus that's floating. It's not like a dream state. It's like he walked into the room. There's a physical man standing there wearing a white robe.
Today, I'd like to welcome Mike McKinsey to the show. Welcome, Mike. How's today treating you?
Hey, pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to hear your story of your near-death experience and absolutely honored and just so excited to have you be a guest on the show. And I don't want to waste any time because I'm really excited to hear your story. So let's dig into your near-death experience story and anything you want to share leading up to that experience as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because there's a little bit of a setup. So I was living in the Central Valley in California. My oldest son was getting married in Ventura, which was like probably 5 hours away from our house. So the wedding was planned for a Saturday. So on Wednesday we took off and we went down there because we thought, well, let's go down there and do a little sightseeing, make it a vacation, get to know his or her family a little bit because we didn't know them that well. So we left. We got there on a Wednesday afternoon, and the bride to be had booked this really cool hotel where all the out of town guests could show up and stay. So we checked in, and there was this park right next to the hotel. My kids were into baseball. The two boys that went to the wedding with us, they were teenagers. So they brought their wiffle ball and wiffle bat, and they said, "Hey, Dad, come on over and play some home run derby with us." Okay, so I always like to bring this up because it does come up a little bit later when I show up at the hospital.
Okay.
Nothing happened, I mean, I didn't get hurt playing baseball, but I'm trying my best to beat these young kids, and I hadn't swung a bat in a long time, so I'm doing a lot of twisting and things that I hadn't really done in quite a while. I mean, I coached baseball, but I didn't really swing a bat. So later that night, Wednesday night, I started feeling a little sick, like I was getting the flu. And I thought, oh, great, great timing. Here my son's getting married in a couple of days and I'm getting sick. Not good. Wednesday comes around, or Thursday, we did a little sightseeing with her family. We got to know them a little bit, went out to lunch, had a great time. Thursday night, I'm feeling more sick. And, I'm just thinking, God, please, take this away from me. I don't want to be sick for his wedding, and I'm getting worse. So Friday comes around, we go get the tuxes, and Friday night we had the rehearsal dinner, and the bride or the groom's father that's me, pays for the dinner. And so I'm getting sick, and I'm telling everybody, hey, my stomach's not feeling so great, but I'm paying for this meal and it's costing me a lot of money. So I'm gonna have one of every dessert. I'm having all of your leftovers. I'm going to eat until I explode. And so we just kind of made a joke out of it. But then Friday night, after the dinner, my son and I were sitting at the hotel bar having a glass of wine. And he's in the medical field, and he kind of says, maybe it's your appendix. Does your abdomen hurt? And I said, no, it just feels like stomach flu. Because I don't have that point tenderness thing going on where, you everybody that says your appendix, you touch your abdomen, you go crazy, right? I didn't have that. But we just kept thinking, well, he says, well, maybe you got some kind of blockage, He goes, I don't want to be crude or anything, but when's the last time you were able to go to the bathroom? And I said, well, it's been a couple of days, come to think of it, I didn't really pay it a lot of attention. But he says, you should get something for that. So I go back to my room. This is probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. All the other kids were asleep. My wife's asleep. And I thought, my stomach's now, it's really hurting. And I thought, well, I need to go get some Tylenol or something. So I run down to the Quick Stop or Quick Mart, whatever it was, at about 2 in the morning. And I get something that's going to help me go to the bathroom. And it says it'll work in 2 hours, or it could take up to 24 hours. And I thought, well, okay, 2 hours would be great. get this out of the way, I'll be feeling better. The wedding comes around, everything will be fine. Well, I took all that stuff. The Tylenol that I got kind of dulled the pain a little bit, but it didn't really help. And the other stuff had no effect. So we get through we go to the wedding. We get through the whole wedding. Wedding was beautiful. It was outside at a golf course. We had perfect weather. We had this, the big reception inside this great big hall there. I mean, it was just great. So probably about 10:30, a few guests started leaving, and my son comes up to me and he says, "Hey, we're going to go over to Dave and Sandy's house. That's the parents of the bride, and we're going to open the presents and we're going to kind of keep the party going." And I said, "Ben, that's my son." I said, "Ben, I can't do it. I got to go to the hospital. I mean, by now I'm sweating and I'm running a temperature. I checked it before the wedding. I was up to 102, and I thought, I got to get through this, but." So I did. I made it through the wedding. And then since he was in the medical field, like I said, he says, go to Ventura County Hospital. They got a great staff there. I know them. He'd been working in Santa Barbara, which is pretty close to there. So I did. I went to the ER. My wife's checking me in, and I'm sitting out there, and I'm just, in the waiting room waiting, and I'm in and out of consciousness. I mean, I'm just so sick by then. They called me back. The nurse takes my blood. She sends it off to the lab, and she lays me down and she starts poking around in my abdomen, and she says, "Does that hurt?" And I said, "No." And she goes, "Okay." So then she grabs this little hammer that they check your reflexes with, where they bang on your knee, and she taps the bottom of my foot, and she says, "Does that hurt?" And I kind of laughed because I'm thinking, I just have the flu. Just give me something for the flu. And I laughed and I said, "No, of course not." And then she tapped the other foot, and man, the pain sent me through the roof. I mean, I screamed.
Wow.
And she says, "Okay, well, that's your appendix." And I'm like, "But my abdomen doesn't hurt. It's just my stomach." She goes, "Look, your appendix are probably ruptured." She says, "Hang on." She goes and gets the blood work back from the lab. She looks at it and she goes, "Yeah, your white blood cell count is really super high. I'm going to call in a surgeon. You've probably ruptured your appendix." And she says, "Did you do anything, any unusual physical activity in the last couple of days?" And I thought, yeah, I played baseball with the boys. That was on Wednesday. This is Saturday. She
Wow.
says, "Well, that's a long time. If your appendix ruptured, we need to get you into surgery right away." So she calls a surgeon. He comes in and talks to me for a couple of minutes. And he says, "Yeah, your blood cell count's really high." But he said, I don't know how bad it is. If it ruptured on Wednesday, he goes, "You probably should have been dead already. But I'll go in through your belly button with the scope so I can look around and see, how bad it is." And he says, "So I'll see you in surgery." So they wheel me down the hall, say goodbye to my wife. They slide me over onto the surgical table, and I don't remember them putting a mask on me or anything. I just looked off to my right, and Jesus is standing there in a white robe. And he holds out his hand and he says, "I want to answer your prayer." And now I am thinking still very clearly, and this is not uh, Jesus that's floating. It's not like a dream state. It's like he walked into the room. There's a physical man standing there wearing a white robe. He's got dark brown hair, shoulder length. His skin is a little darker than, the white Jesus that I've seen growing up, right? Because I'm, a kid in California growing up. You're shown the blonde Jesus with blue eyes. He didn't
Blew
look
up.
at all like that. But I knew that was Jesus. He had, like I said, dark olive skin. He looked like an Arab man. And his eyes were like super dark bluish green. And I always tell people when I tell this story, when his eyes looked in mine, he looked into my soul. And and so I'm thinking, answer my prayer. What the heck is going on? Where's the surgeon? What is happening here? And he just held out his hand and he just stood there. And I thought, "Oh, okay, I got to take his hand." But I thought, my first thought was, I must be dead. But then I thought, well, people that when they die, they say they float above their bodies and they can see, because I'd heard of NDEs before, even though I didn't really believe in them, because there was always something that sounded kind of weird about him. But I thought, well, I'm not floating away. If he wants to take my hand, I don't know. I mean, what's going to happen? But I thought, what am I going to do? Tell Jesus no? Come on.
It's funny because this whole time I was curious and asked, like, I was going to ask, were you still in your body? Were you still feeling pain? Or were you outside of your body when you saw Jesus? But
I
you
was
just answered that.
I was the regular guy laying in my body on the surgical table. I remember them putting me on the surgical table because I thought, well, it's really cold,
Yeah.
and it's narrow. And then the next thing I know, there he is. And so I took his hand, and as soon as I did, we were standing on like what turned out to be a mountain, but all I could see was grass beneath my feet, my bare feet. I'm still in my hospital gown, and my senses were heightened to the point where I could count every blade of grass below my feet. I just knew how many blades of grass there were, and everything else in front of me was white, like super bright white. I'm still holding Jesus' hand, and off to my right, there's this kind of basketball size, brighter white circle it starts sending out these, they look like fluorescent light tubes, the tubes that you hang in the ceiling, like in your shop or whatever. They're 4 feet long.
Yeah.
These were 2 feet long, and they were a little bit fatter than the regular the light bulbs. All of a sudden, one of them starts coming out, and it goes past me. Another one starts coming. They start coming faster. One of them's coming right at my head, and I'm thinking, okay, what do I do now? This thing's coming at my head. Should I duck? And it hits me in my forehead, and as it does, it kind of makes this light buzzing sound, and it warms me all the way to my toes. And I thought, wow, that is weird. Now, still, everything is still bright white in front of me. But all of a sudden, it's like somebody pulled a curtain. It's because the white light went like this. It just got like pulled across from me. And now all of a sudden, I'm looking at this landscape. I can see that I'm on top of a mountain. In front of me on this mountain, on the way down in front of me, there's like these little like flowers, just beautiful little flowers. They're light purple and yellow and kind of orange. And they're kind of bending in the wind. They're like wispy little flowers, but there's no wind. And at the bottom of that mountain, now the fog has dropped down into this valley, but it's dropped on top of this big giant city. And so all I can see because of the fog, or a veil, as I call it, are city buildings that are sticking up through the fog. And there's like a Capitol dome, and it's all gold. There was another couple other domes. But most of them were like tall steeples, like real pointy steeples. And the one thing I noticed about them, it was like church steeples, but there was, like in church steeples, there a lot of times there's a cross at the top, but there were no crosses. And I thought about that later, when I came back around. But I just remember thinking that's kind of weird looking. And then on the other side of this city, there's another mountain, and it goes up, and there are these trees. They look like pine trees, but they're bluish green. They're beautiful. They're all perfectly shaped. And the weird thing is, and then above that are the colors of the sky that I'm looking at. It looked like a sunset, but there's no sun. I don't see any sun setting. It's blue on the bottom, kind of right by the trees, and then at the very top, it gets it's like orange and red, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful color, but it's really super vivid. And the way somebody asked me to describe the color one time, and I thought, okay, if you take a picture with your iPhone and you take that little setting and you push it all the way to the right so it gets like super vibrant,
Yeah.
but the colors kind of mesh together and it gets weird looking. They were like those colors, but they weren't weird looking. It was just still all in focus. And now the lights, the little like the fluorescent tubes that were coming at me, they're now going across the valley. And one of them goes across and it hits the tip of one of these trees. And it was like there was a diamond on the tip of this tree, because when the light hit that diamond, it just exploded into all these tiny little light source things, these streaks. And it was like fireworks, but they were all bright white. And then more of them started hitting diamonds on the tips of the trees, and there was just fireworks everywhere. And I looked at it, and I looked back at the light source. And when I look back at the light source, Jesus says to me, "It's the glory of the Lord." And I always get a little bit emotional when I think of that, because I'm back there. When he said that, I fell to my knees. I just couldn't even stand. And when my knees hit the ground, they shocked me and they brought me back. And so now, instead of looking at this beautiful scenery, I'm looking at a doctor leaning over me. He says, "Do you know your name?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, what the heck? Where's Jesus? Where are the lights? Where's all the glory? Where's all this stuff?" And he says, "Do you know your name?" And I said, "Mike." But I answered him in my mind. I didn't verbalize it. And he says, "Okay, one more time. Do you know your name?" I mean, he was kind of forceful this time. This is the third time he's asked me. And I thought, oh shoot, I need to tell him. And so I opened my mouth to talk, and my throat was so dry, and I was hot again and sweaty, but I was able to say, "Mike." And he says, "Okay, do you know where you are?" And I go, okay, was it the wedding? I think I was in heaven, but now I'm in Ventura, I think. And so I said, "Ventura." And he says, "Okay." And he turns around and he looks at people in the room. This is when I realized there's like 5 or 6 other people. And he says, "Okay, he's back." And those were some nurses. They were all dressed in these blue scrubs. Some of them were light blue, some dark blue. And one guy walks by, he pats me on my leg, and he says, "Take it easy, buddy." And I'm still thinking, man, what's happening here? I'm still kind of like trying to piece it all together. Um, so they put me back in ICU. I spent 4 days in ICU. I spent a total of 12 days in the hospital. And the surgeon came and saw me the next day. And he said, he goes, "Hey, heard we had a little episode last night." And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." And, and I thought, should I tell him what happened? Because I'm thinking I just had a near death experience, but I thought, no, I'm not going to tell him. And he says, your case was bad. And he says, "In fact, it was the worst case I've ever seen." And I said, "Wow." And because I'm weak to the point where I can't lift my hands off my chest. I'm just sitting there like this with the nurse's call button in
Yeah.
my hands. But I was so weak I couldn't pick my hands up. And he turned out he turned around and left. And then he comes back in the room and he goes, "I said it was the worst case I've ever seen, but actually I've seen worse, but yours is the worst I've ever seen, where the patient lived." And he says, "You shouldn't be here." I said, "Well, thanks for saving my life." Um, but after I started thinking, you know, when Jesus said, "I want to answer your prayer," um, I thought, what prayer? And then I remembered when I was a little kid, like I remember I started asking God to show me heaven, because like I went to my grandfather's funeral, and everybody kept saying he's in a better place now, he's in heaven. And I kept thinking, heaven sounds pretty cool, but you know, uh, God, you gotta give me some proof here. You need to show me heaven. I've always told people I'm a guy who needs to take apart the watch to see the gears and the springs to know how it works. That's my analytical mind. And I always used to tell God, "Well, you made my mind this way. I'm doubting this heaven thing, so I want you to show me." And it was about 40 years later that he took me and he showed me. There was
That's
another.
fascinating. I've been curious this whole time about that, what the prayer was that he was answering. So
Yeah.
I'm curious though, before we move on. So um, when you came to and he asked you your name and where you were from, he said he's back. Did you flatline? Did they
Yeah.
share this with you? You did. Okay. So it
Yeah,
was a documented near death.
they did. Well, okay, so here's the funny part. So I was, I loved being where I was when Jesus took my hand. I thought, but when I came back, I thought, man, I told my wife everything's going to be fine, and it's not going to be fine. I mean, I'm really sick. I shouldn't be here. And then I saw the crash cart where they had the little, they have the paddles, and one of them was laying on the floor. It's got the curly little wire hanging down.
Mhm.
And I saw that, and it really scared me because I thought I didn't get to say goodbye to my kids. I mean, what am I going to be missing? I mean, sure, heaven's a great place, but still, I was 45 years old, and that's
Mhm.
pretty young. I didn't want to check out just then.
Right.
Um, I had a lot going on, and especially with my son getting married, I knew he was going to have kids and grandkids and that whole thing. So,
Mhm.
um, but the interesting thing was uh, when he showed me the glory of the Lord, and it just like dropped me to my knees because I couldn't stand it. I remember when I was a kid watching a Charlie Brown's Christmas, and back then people watching, people my age will realize it, you know we used to have to gather around the TV at a certain time to watch the television show, or otherwise you missed it. We didn't have VCRs back then. You either watch it or you don't. So if it comes on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, the whole family's there watching this show. And I remember that one part where Linus comes out on the stage, and he's got this little blanket, and he quotes from the Bible, the story of when the wise men were looking for Jesus when he was being born. And he says, the glory of the Lord shone all around him. And I used to always say to God, okay, that's something I need to see too. You know, I
Right.
want to see heaven, but I want to see the glory of the Lord, because what does that look like? I mean, if God made heaven and all that I know and everything I interact with I mean, such a miracle when you look around at this world, and you
Mhm.
think, okay, what is the glory? What does his glory look like? Man, that must be really something.
Yeah.
And he showed me that too. He killed two birds with one stone, I guess.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I was curious about that too, about what that meant to you specifically when Jesus said that to you. And I have so many questions about your experience and some things that you've mentioned around like this experience watching the Charlie Brown Christmas special, and then what it was like coming back. So obviously you have recovered fully.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, and this might be a two-part question, but prior to your near-death experience, it sounds like you had a little bit of exposure to God and maybe religion. I'm curious about what that was like before your belief system and your relationship with God or source, and then how that was affected, or if it was, obviously it seems like it gave you proof. So it was
Yeah.
affected after, but what was that like after as well? So maybe let's go back before and talk about what your relationship with religion or spirituality was prior to your near death experience.
Well, when I was a kid, like mom I had two sisters, one older, one younger, and she used to drag us down to church every Sunday. But yeah, I didn't really get that much out of it. I learned about God, and I thought, okay, cool. There's somebody made all this stuff. Yeah, but I mean, you're young mind, and you as a child, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But everybody said, we'll pray to him, and so I started talking to him. But uh, uh, it didn't mean a lot to me as a kid. It just didn't. Um, I didn't have a quote unquote relationship with God, with Jesus. But I was always curious. As a kid, I just always wanted to know all this stuff. Um, as a teenager, I went to a youth group, and I was active in church, but it was more of a place like to hang out with some friends, and I was on the basketball team, and it was just a way to have fun. And then we would go to church on Sundays, and kind of the same thing. I just didn't get a lot out of it.
Mhm.
Um, so I was still kind of searching. And then when I had kids, I thought, okay, we need to find a home church and get them, introduce them to God. And that's when kind of like my spiritual eyes started opening, and I started exploring. I started reading the Bible and reading all these different books about, what it means to be a Christian. So I had influence from other people. And I finally was baptized when I was, I don't know, probably 40 years old or so. And I think that's when it kind of all made sense. Like that's when I became a Christian, and I started talking to God and praying to Jesus. And I have like so many answers to prayer that it's just crazy. A lot of people say it's just coincidence. There's so many coincidences in your life. But it's like I ask God for specific, I mean, very specific things. And I've heard his voice audibly a couple of times.
Mhm.
I've got a few stories of that if you want to hear them. But it didn't mean a lot to me as a kid. It did. And then certainly after the NDE, I think that just opened my eyes. Like, wow, you took 40 years to answer a prayer, but you did it. You showed me heaven. And people have said, well, I've heard all the theories, the dying brain theory. It's just something that you go back and you relive because it's what you are familiar with. And I think, well, that wasn't the Jesus that I knew. I've never seen that man before. And it wasn't a spiritual guy. It was a physical, it was physical Jesus standing in the room. And I've never seen the glory of the Lord. I've never seen heaven. I've never seen those lights. And so if it was just my dying brain, I got a wild imagination.
Yeah, and that leads me to another curiosity. So I'm curious about your experience when you were standing on the mountain and you were seeing these lights and you were seeing the beautiful colors, and there was no sun, but it looked like a sunset. Were you like, did you understand like inherently what was going on, or were you confused? Like, it sounds like there was no words other than what Jesus said to you exchanged. Like, I'm curious about what that experience was for you in those moments. And did it feel like a moment, or did it feel like a long time?
It felt like real time. It felt like maybe 10 to 15 minutes at the most. I'm standing there, the curtains being pulled, I'm looking at all this stuff. And it didn't occur to me like, wow, I'm standing in heaven. I was just so in awe. I just kept, one thing would be revealed and then another and another. And I just kept looking and just going, oh my gosh, what? Oh, wow, wow. I just kept thinking, this is unbelievable. And then when they're bringing me back, that's when I started thinking, I think I was in heaven. And then it kind of made sense, the prayer, and I'm remembering all that stuff. So yeah, when it was going on, it was, like I said, real time. And I I didn't connect the dots. I didn't think Jesus took me to heaven to show me something. I just was just in awe.
Yeah, just being with that moment. That sounds
Yeah.
like
And
so
it took me
exciting.
actually 3 days before I could even tell my wife what had happened. When
Mhm.
the surgeon was in there, I thought I need to tell him, and I got all choked up and emotional. And he was kind of looking at me kind of funny, like, hey, you're gonna be okay, don't worry. And he was telling me all this medical stuff, and I got tears in my eyes thinking of what I'd just gone through. And I
Right. You're
told
like, I don't care about the medical stuff.
I
Like
know, I
I was just
know.
in heaven.
If I die, I know where I'm going.
Right.
But my wife would come in and she'd say, how are you doing today? And I'd be like, you're not going to believe this. I got to tell you something. And she said, what? And I just start bawling. And I was just so weak. Like I said, I couldn't pick my hands up. I was in there for 12 days, 11 nights, and I lost 35 pounds. And I didn't have 35 pounds to lose. I mean, but when I got out of there, man, I told I, a friend of mine came over from the church we were going to. It's a good friend of mine. He comes in and he looks at me, and I'm sitting on the couch, and he goes, "Whoa, who are you? And what have you done with Mike?" Because I was just so sick still, after they released me. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's an interesting experience for sure.
Yeah. So it took a couple of days to tell your wife about the experience. I'm
Yeah.
curious how she received it and how others around you received that. Were they open to it? Did you even believe it happened? Did you
Mm.
doubt it? Like a lot of near-death experiencers kind of go through this process of like, I don't want to tell anyone because what if they
Well,
don't
so
believe
for
me?
me, because it was such a physical experience, it took me a couple of days before I could hold a pencil in my hand, but I did ask my wife to bring in a notepad so I could start writing down all the stuff that had happened. And I kept logs of like day one, day two, day three. Just every day I would write something. Um, Her reaction was kind of strange. When I look back on it, she was just like sort of matter of fact, like almost like she didn't believe me, like, oh yeah, sure, you died, you went to heaven, right? But that friend of mine that came over, like he's a guy, I'm a guy. He sits down on the couch and I tell him, I say, I got to tell you what happened. He was a church buddy of mine and he's a believer. And I said, it's going to take me a while because I'm starting to cry already. And he holds my hand and he says, tell me about this. You can do this. I want to hear it. And so I start telling him, and he starts crying too. And while I'm telling him, he's crying. His wife is sitting there. She's crying. And I thought, man, I don't know if I can even do this. I mean, I wrote a book about it, but it took me like 10 years to write it because I would cry when I'd write it. I mean, even now talking to you, this is 20 years ago that this happened. They just wrote it about it in the Glimpses of Eternity from Guideposts. That's kind of how this whole thing got started again. And I always think, okay, can I keep a story alive for 20 years and then start telling it again? Only God could do that. But I finally got to the point where I could tell it pretty well without like breaking down and bawling. I mean, I
Mm,
still get choked up and I got to sit there and think for a minute, okay, you can do this, encourage myself. But I did tell my my Sunday school class, there's probably 25 or 30 people, and they were all crying, it just was, but they were close friends and they know how close I was to actually dying. I mean, the next day I had another bout with where I almost got pneumonia, and and that was another close call too. I mean, it took me a while to get back, back to
yeah,
living.
3 days with your appendix ruptured.
Yeah,
That's
I had the nurse tell me. She said, "Yeah, you were so septic. You shouldn't have lived.
yeah,
You know, you should have
that's a
been
miracle
dead." Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and I'm not sure if your beliefs align, but I've interviewed quite a few near-death experiencers, and one of the common themes that I've heard is that when they have their near-death experience and they go to heaven, many have seen Jesus. They've told me the same thing that they've looked in his eyes, and when their eyes locked, they just knew like there was just nothing but love. And so the way they explain it is that there's just this big dose of truth and unconditional love. And when they come back, they're a little more or a lot more sensitive, or they have like kind of psychic powers, or they can tune in a little bit more. I'm curious if that was part of your experience or not.
It definitely changed me. I'm definitely much more emotional than I was. I mean, there are times when I'm talking to somebody and I'll just have to catch myself because I'll cry, talking about Jesus. But things just like get me like in my soul, I don't know how to explain that. Um, but I don't think that like when Jesus looked at me, when I say he looked into my soul, I felt like he was like, there's no better way to say it, but like he was for me, like he was the big brother that I never had, you know, yeah, I felt the love, but it wasn't like, I don't know, like he was there for me. He's like, we're going to show you this because you asked for it. You know, it may have been a while ago, but that doesn't mean anything to us because we're outside of time, you know. So here's the answer to your prayer, and you know, do with it what you want, but you asked for it, so let's go. You
Yeah.
know, I don't think I'm any more psychic. I mean, I think I can read people pretty well, but I
Mhm.
spent some good many years in sales, and so that's kind of one of the things that you pick up on, you know. But
Me too. I got you.
yeah, you learn how to read people, but I'm not psychic by any means.
Mhm. Yeah, got it. So now I want to jump back to, you mentioned that you've heard God's voice audibly, and you said that you would share a couple of those experiences. I'd love to hear one or
Oh
more.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the really the best, well, I mean, there's a couple of them. I hate to grade them, but the one that comes to mind where the church I was going to at the time, they wanted to send kids to the church camp, and they wanted to get kids from around the neighborhood around the church to go for free, but it costs $50 per kid. So they thought, well, let's have a fundraiser and let's raise this money, and then we'll go invite kids in the neighborhood to go that don't go to church now, but they're around here. So we'll go knock on doors and we'll tell them, hey, we're going to cover the $50. All you got to do is bring your kid down to the church on Monday. We'll bring them back Friday, you know, and they'll learn about God. And the big scheme of things, you want to bring their families to the church and all that. So we're at this potluck dinner, and this guy's up on stage and he's saying, you know, we're gonna raffle these things off. We're gonna make some money, and we're gonna raise money so that kids can do this. And I'm sitting there and I hear this voice, an audible voice on the side of my ear, and it says, I want you to give $1,000. And I kind of turned around like what? And I hear the voice again. I want you to give $1,000. And I turned around this way, and I'm expecting a guy, you know, standing there behind me, like
Right.
punking me, right?
Yeah.
Hey, you know, yeah, it's the voice of God, right? But there's nobody there. And the second time I said, what? My wife looks at me and she says, are you okay? And I said, did you just say something? And she goes, no. And so I turned all the way around, and there's nobody like within 10 feet of me.
Yeah.
And I said, I just heard somebody say they want me to give $1,000. And right when I told her that, the voice says to me, you'll get it back. And I'm like, what is going on here? So I thought, okay, I'm going crazy. I'm gonna just pick up my
Was
stuff.
this the first time you had heard?
First time I've ever
First time.
heard a voice
Okay.
like that. Yeah, audible
Got
voice.
it.
So I thought, well, okay, my checkbook's in the car. I'm gonna run out there and get it. You know, this was back in the day when you didn't have Venmo and you know all
Right.
right, you had to write a check. So
Zelle,
I go out to my
PayPal.
car and I sit down, I grab my checkbook and I start praying. I go, God, are you telling me to give $1,000? And then I thought, well, that's a dumb question because I already heard him. He's telling me to give $1,000. So I got up and I walked in and I wrote $1,000 check. And that friend of mine that I was telling you about, the touchy-feely guy, right? He's going to that church. He sees me and he gets up because he saw me leave and he goes, you okay? And I go, yeah, but I go, dude, you're not going to believe this, but I just heard a voice say I need to give $1,000 to this program. And then he said, I'm going to get it back. And I think it was God talking to me. And my friend says, well, if that was God, then he knows that you're going to tell me, and I would take it as a challenge. So I'm going to write $1,000 check too. And I said, hey, he said I'd get it back. He didn't say anything about you. And he goes, that's okay. Let's go write the check. So we did. So the next day I come home for lunch. And I had done some stock trading. So I had this little TD Ameritrade account, and I had a couple $1,000s in there, not a lot. And I would do some day trading, and I'd make a couple trades during the week, and maybe I'd make $20, maybe $50 a week, you know. But it was extra money, and I had little kids, and it was kind of fun. And I log on. This is the day after I wrote that $1,000 check. The check hasn't even cleared my bank yet. I log onto the TD Ameritrade account and I notice that there's an extra $1,000 in there, and I go, what the heck? You know, and I click on a couple of the stocks. One of the stocks had gone up from like $2 to whatever, $12. and it gone up $1,000. And so I go, oh man, I got to sell this one. So I sold it. And then I look at the total and I go, I have $1,000 more. And then I thought, wait a minute, I just made $1,000. My check hasn't cleared and I have an extra $1,000 in my account. I just got the $1,000 back.
Yeah.
So I'm walking out the door and I picked up the phone and I call my buddy. I go, you're not going to believe it, but I just got the $1,000 back. He's like, what? I go, yeah, I got $1,000. I told him what I did. It was crazy.
Yeah. There are no coincidences.
That certainly wasn't a coincidence. Yeah.
Yeah, I fully believe in synchronicities for sure, and guidance. And as you know, we move through this, reality in this life, that there are little signs and synchronicities everywhere. And that was an awesome story. So thank you for sharing. Are there any other ones that you have to share? And I'm curious about this. I'll share some context. When I was a little girl, and I was not in a supportive environment. But just like you had gestured, I would hear a male voice behind my right ear. And I went to my mom. I was probably maybe 4, 5, 6. I really young, so don't really remember. And I would tell her, Mom, God's talking to me. God's talking to me. And the environment I was in was to not trust that and instill fear. So I was told that that was the devil tempting me, and not to listen to it. And so I shut off any kind of connection until, the past maybe 10 years or so. So I'm just curious about these experiences that you've heard God, because I know that I have heard God too, but it's harder for me to accept it.
Yeah, the other time was, and this kind of all came together sort of funny. It was a Memorial Day picnic that we were going to have at church later that day. And so during the Sunday morning service, our youth pastor's family came in. They walked in as we were all standing up singing. They walked in front of me and my family, and he has 4 little kids, and they all file in. They were kind of late. And one of the little girls turned around and looks at me and smiles, just the cutest little girl. And I heard this voice say, help them. And I was like, help them, and I heard it again, help them. And one of the other little kids turns around and looks at me and kind of waves. I knew him. And I sat down and I started praying, and I said, God, are you telling me to help him? Like, am I supposed to give him money? Or, I mean, that's how I help people, give them money.
Right.
I don't know what you're asking me. Didn't hear anything else about it. So we got ready to go to the picnic later that day, and I'd been praying about this. Lord, if you want me to give them money, I don't know how much. I mean, it's just such a weird thing, but I knew I had to give them some money at that point. I'd made up my mind. And so my wife says, okay, well, if you're going to give them money, let's stop, and you should probably put it in a card or something, right? And I said, yeah, so let's go to the CVS or whatever, and I'll get some money out of the ATM at the front of the store. And she says, how much are you going to get? And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I've been praying about it, but I don't know. I said, whatever's the most I can get out of the ATM, I guess I'll just do that. So I go get a card, it says, thanks for being my friend or something, or you're a blessing or whatever. And I go up to the ATM, and it says, the most you can get from this ATM is $200. So I grab $200, I put it in the card. I start walking back out to the car, and my wife's mom lived alone, and we had picked her up a little while before, and we were going to take her to the picnic. So while I'm in CVS talking, picking up that card and getting the money, my wife had told her mom about, she said, well, God's telling Mike to give the youth pastor $200. And she goes, oh, I want to help. So I get back in the car with my $200, and she holds out a 20, and she goes, here, I want to help you. I want to give you the $20. And I go, $220, that's a weird amount. Let's stick to the 200. I said, if God wanted you to give $200, maybe he would tell you, like he told me, or if he wanted to wanted you to give some money. And she goes, well, how do you know he didn't? And I was like, oh, okay, she got me there, right? So I took her $20 and I thought this is a really weird amount, $220. I put it in there, the card in the envelope. And we go to the picnic, and I didn't get to see the youth pastor all day, you know. So on my way out, I gave it to his wife and I said, hey, just give this to the pastor. And so it was probably 8:30 that night. He calls me and he's crying, and he says, hey, I just wanted to say thank you for that, for the card and the money. He goes, you're not going to believe this, but my wife was driving around in the van. They had an old van,
Mhm.
and one of the tires was going flat, and she pulled into this tire shop, and the tire guy says, you need four tires. And he says, I've got four used tires that I could put on here. I'll write you up an estimate, but he said, I'll fill up the tire that is going flat. But he said, you really should do this in the next couple of days. And the pastor says to me, do you know how much that estimate was for four of those new tires? I said, no. He goes, $220. And I said, you're kidding. That weird amount, the extra 20, if I would have gone with what I felt God was telling me, it would have not been enough. But mother-in-law throwing the extra 20, $220.
Right.
It was just, just incredible. So another coincidence, right?
I love those miracle stories. And what I love the most about, I love two things. Like, I just want to highlight two things about these stories is that the guidance when you heard his voice was to help others, to be of service in some way. And when your mother-in-law said, how do you know he didn't?
Right.
Is like, it's not always about hearing God's voice, right? Like inspiration, God can speak to us in so many different ways. And so I love the pieces of the story that just keep trusting, keep moving forward, keep going with
Yeah.
that, guidance, whatever it is, if it's something that you audibly hear, or if it's just, I want to help and this is what I have,
Right.
like that I want to help. That's God too, right? Like everything's God. So thank you so much for sharing those stories.
Sure.
I'm curious if there's anything else that you would like to share about your experience, or anything that you wanted to share that we just didn't cover today. Um, now
You
it's
know, we talked a little bit about the things that I learned from that experience, but the one thing that I remember, like when I was when I was in the hospital, they always make you want to walk. They want to get you out of bed and make you walk a lot. And I had four tubes coming out of me in various places with bags, and just it was a hassle getting out of bed because I had to hang all these things on this little pole, and wheel the pole up and down the hallway. But I remember walking down the hallway one day, and this hospital overlooks the ocean. I mean, it's in a Ventura's a beautiful city,
Mhm.
and it sits up on a hill. And I remember walking, and I would go by these pictures on the wall, hanging on the wall, and I could just hear God saying, "Man, you got to slow down." I was working a really, really stressful job. I was a superintendent for a real estate development company, and I had to go through 35 to 40 houses every day to make sure that things were getting done, that were getting done right. I mean, it was just super stressful, and I just lost like touch with everything around me. It was just like, go, 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 raising kids, baseball practice, football practice, all the stuff that goes on with raising kids, and then a stressful job. And so I would walk down the hall and I would look at pictures like of landscapes and flowers and a lot of ocean pictures. And then I would get down to the end of the hall and I would look out at the ocean and I think, man, it's just, there's so much beauty around here. I mean, we live in a fallen, sinful world, but gosh, there's just so much beauty, and I'm missing it. I'm not taking the time. So one of the things that I do now is like when there's a sunset, I'll just stop and I'll watch it because I'll just think, man, that is just so cool. I will actually smell the roses. I'll, I mean, it's a cliche, but we
Right.
just, how many of us say, oh yeah, stop and smell the roses or make the most of the moment and then just don't, you know?
Yeah.
So that was one of the things that God was telling me, just slow down and just take it all in because, you know, this is my creation and you're just kind of whistling along, just like missing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And I was. So that everybody says live in the moment, but man, you just have to just take time.
Yeah. Yeah. It reminds me of something Eckhart Tolle would say in his Power of Now book, or actually, I don't know where he said it, but he says, take 20 minutes to meditate every day. And if you don't have time to meditate for 20 minutes a day, meditate for an hour.
That's great.
Because we get so task oriented, especially when we're parents, right? We've got soccer, theater, and all of these things, and
Yeah.
those are expensive. So we've got to work harder to make sure our kids can do what they want, and we can just get tunnel vision. And so I love the lesson that it's time to slow down and be
Yeah,
in
for sure.
God's creation
And those
with
are all distractions too that keep you from appreciating it, It's
absolutely.
that busyness, boy.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
very beautiful. Well, I have three questions that I ask all my guests. So the first question is, how would you define God?
Oh gosh, I would say God is just love, unconditional love. Everybody says that's what puppies are, and that's what dogs love you unconditionally. But God loves us more than we can possibly imagine, and He wants that relationship with us. I mean, my life is so much better with Jesus in my life. I talk to Him all the time, every single day. I walk around I've got 12 acres of forest land in and I talk to Him all the time. I'm doing stuff, I'm busy, but it's a different kind of busy. But yeah, it's just His unconditional love and His desire to get to know us and for us to know Him uh, is just, it's a yearning. So I'd encourage everybody, just seek Him out. And you can ask Him to reveal Himself to you. He will. I
Yeah,
mean, for me, it took 40 years to answer that prayer, but it sure was worth the wait.
it was answered.
Yeah.
Yes, ask and you shall receive. And I think
Yeah.
that's what we miss a lot is actually just asking,
Yeah.
asking. So thank you. The second question is, what would you say is the purpose of life?
Hmm. Purpose of life. Um, I would say to enjoy God's creation and to further His kingdom. You know, share. There is so many people that laugh because they think, oh, you believe in this fairy tale guy in the sky, right? Uh, and you know, God's revealed Himself to me so many times. It's just not even. I mean, my next book's going to be on uh, proving the existence of God through my personal answered prayers. It's ridiculous how many answered prayers I have. So I think that's just basically the purpose of life is to love His creation, get to know Him, and share the goodness of His kingdom.
And the final question is, if you could take one piece of wisdom that you have now and offer it to a younger version of yourself, what would that one piece of wisdom be?
Oh man, it'd definitely be the slow down thing that we talked about. Yeah, slow down and appreciate what's out there. You know, you get up in the morning and you think, okay, as a kid, I used to think, okay, if it's not raining today, I'm gonna play basketball. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this, and by your day's over. You keep looking forward to my birthday's in 3 days. So I'm just oblivious to anything that's going on until that moment gets there, and then you look forward to something else. Football practice, or whatever, playing with my friends. you forget all the stuff in between. It's the journey.
Mhm.
I would just tell my younger self, man, slow down. Don't don't wish it away. You know, I had I raised four kids, and gosh, it goes by so fast. It's another cliche. It just goes by so fast. I could tell the younger me, don't push them away when they're hugging you. Don't, man, just enjoy it. Slow down and enjoy it.
Yeah. I think when you have kids and you watch them grow up, my kids are now 19, 14. She'll be 15 tomorrow and 9. And when I look back, it's like I'm never getting those days back.
I
So
know. Yeah.
every moment now I do the best I can to savor it. I am human and I get focused on, we got to do this, but yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. It does
awesome.
go
And
by fast.
how it does. And how do people find you if they want to get your book or get in touch with you?
The easiest way on Facebook is the name of the book that I wrote about it. I actually wrote it as a fictional book, but all the NDE stuff is real. They can find me at Accidental Heaven on Facebook, and then this is the one that uh, Guideposts put my story in there. I didn't write this one, but they put the story in there. So the easiest way is Accidental Heaven on Facebook.
Perfect. I'll be sure to include links to your Facebook page and even probably to Amazon so they can check out the book if they want to do that as
Oh,
well
thank
in
you. I
the
appreciate
description
that.
of the show. So
Yeah, thank
thank
you.
you so much, Mike, for joining me today and for sharing your story, not just here on my podcast, but other podcasts, as well as writing your book. Yeah, it's just been such an honor and such a pleasure. And I just appreciate you being you and sharing your experiences with the world to make it a better place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I would like to personally thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you haven't already, please be sure to like this episode, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications so that you never miss a beat. And if you really resonated with this content, please share it with all of your friends so that collectively we can expand our consciousness. Have a very blessed week.